Welcome to Heavy Networking, the flagship podcast from the Packet Pushers Podcast Network. Here at Packet Pushers, we cover networking, cloud, security, strategy, and leadership content for IT engineers for your professional career development. In today's episode with sponsor Cisco Systems, we discuss artificial intelligence, specifically AI as related to network automation. Now, maybe the thought of a hallucinating ChatGPT having something to do with your network automation stack made you yell at a random stranger as you're out on your morning run. But the story of AI for IT operations it's really more nuanced than the hot takes that we're getting about the confidently dumb results that large language models sometimes come up with. Our guests from Cisco are Omar Sultan and Javier Antich. Omar is the Director of Product Management for Automation and AI, and Javier is a Principal PLM for AI. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on Heavy Networking today. Welcome. Javier, the first question goes to you. We got to start at a high level of this AI conversation here, because when we're talking about AI that's related to network automation, we need to understand what sort of AI that is. Do we mean an LLM? Some other kind of AI or a combination? Give us the lowdown, Javier.
Today, everyone is sort of interpreting AI in their own way. And that's a risk because it might result in that we don't know exactly what are we talking about or we are talking about different things. So at least for us, when we talk about AI, it's all those different techniques that will help us automate or accelerate decisions, right? And that's a big spectrum of possibilities. And we see this more as a toolbox rather than just one specific technique. Of course, these days, generative AI is extremely sexy, it's extremely attractive, it's a trending topic, and everyone is interested in it, but just only part of the story. That's one piece of the puzzle, a very important one. But there's many other techniques within the umbrella of AI that we should not ignore because, particularly in the context of networking, they're extremely useful, right? And at least as we are looking at this always, more problem-centric rather than technology-centric for us. This is a toolbox, and we'll use the tools that are the right for each of the problems, right? And I think that's what we need, how we need to look at AI as a big toolbox, and that we can leverage, for a lot of different types of network pain points.
Javier, I've sort of sliced up AI into two big boxes. One side's the LLM, which to my mind is like essentially it's generally text-based, and its job is to sort of do a very good job with statistical analysis to put sensible words in order. And then the other bucket is like more unstructured or semi-structured data, and I want to use an AI or machine learning to look for anomalies or interesting connections that I might not have anticipated or do some kind of predictive analytics. Is that a fair distinction? Are there other distinctions we should be talking about?
The main distinction, in my opinion, is between, when we think about AI, is between what we call machine learning, which is basically a lot of different techniques or algorithms that learn from data, that learn from the experience that they get through the data training. There are other techniques that are within the umbrella of AI, which are not machine learning, but they are just as useful for many different types of use cases. These are optimization algorithms, this is constraint programming, this is expert systems as well, and so on. So this is the main distinction between machine learning and non-machine learning. And then, of course, within machine learning, there's a big bucket of techniques all under the umbrella of the neural networks, right? And neural networks enable a lot of different types of use cases. In the limit, right? In terms of the deepest, the largest neural networks, and the, let's say, maybe more powerful these days are the language models, which is where generative AI is, right? So generative AI is at the end of the day a subset of machine learning, which is a subset of AI.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more of a spectrum, right? You have heuristics and rule-based on one end, you have things like machine learning and algo in the middle, and then neural networks with like Gen AI at the other end. And part of what we try and, when we talk to customers, like establishing this thing, and you're kind of trying to pick the right tool for the problem you're trying to solve. We very much, try and drive the point. This is an operation strategy, not an AI strategy. Like your problem set hasn't changed just because ChatGPT is a thing now. It's probably the same sorts of problems. Here's some more sophisticated tools. Much the same way you might pick a routing protocol based on complexity of your network with stacked routes at one end and some god awful behemoth on the other end. You kind of pick the right set of complexity for the problem you're trying to solve. Same thing here with picking the right AI tool to get a problem fixed, as opposed to I've got ChatGPT. How can I use it to do things?
Let's give an example of a problem that we might have in network operations that Gen AI could solve.
So within Crosswalk Network Controller, we have an algo that we use for both planning as well as real-time bandwidth analysis. So we can set some policies within CNC and say, okay, if we hit congestion levels of a certain amount, put some tactical routing policies in place to help alleviate that congestion until the congestion goes away. So we have, a gathering of the traffic data, then we do some forecasting and prediction based on that. And it's very basic. It's algo based. It's not, it's very fundamental machine learning. Understand, okay, we're going to hit issues. We're going to run into performance issues. Put the tactical routing policies in place, alleviate the stress on the links, and then roll them back when we don't need them anymore.
So there's two components there. That one component was the analysis of traffic that is leading to, we're going to have congestion if the routing topology stays the way it is now.
Yep.
And the way we can relieve that would be the second part of it. So we could relieve it by spreading traffic flows over these other links, or standing up a temporary link, or, whatever it might be. So Gen AI would tackle both aspects of that, not just the prediction of the problem, but a potential solution to the problem.
So this is not Gen AI. That's what I'm saying. This is not a Gen AI solution. We're just using regular, boring old algorithms to do the forecasting. So, that's our point. It doesn't always have to be Gen AI. It can be, just, plain old boring machine learning, just math. It could even just be simple heuristics of kind of rule-based stuff to pull some of this stuff off. I mean, Javier's got some cool examples of Gen AI's solution sets as well. But this is trying to keep things pragmatic. This is something that's kicking around today.
The things where language models excel is at semantically interpreting what you are requesting to them, right? And as a consequence of that semantic analysis, they produce an output. One, let's say, interesting use case that has, it's been explored, and I'm sure many are, evaluating this type of applicability. Let's suppose in a network observability solution, right, that today, whenever there are, certain, network incident, there's going to be a bunch of, alerts or very, machine-centric artifacts that are generated that then need to be analyzed by a human, by a network operator engineer, say, okay, what all is going on here, right? So you have 10 different alarms, maybe impacting different parts of the network. So how do you interpret that in a timely manner, of course? So LLMs have, and generative AI, of course, is the more generic, field, but specifically LLMs have the capability to then interpret semantically what all is going on and producing you a summary that is more human-friendly. So I think that makes it much simpler for network engineers to understand what is actually going on. You're not just seeing 10 different alerts with a lot of different fields, interface names, IP addresses, and whatnot, but you get something that, based on the knowledge that the language model has of networking, which in many cases is significant, it can give you an interpretation that at the minimum is useful for you to make a decision, right? So you don't need to go through all those details.
I've seen demos of this kind of a thing where there's an initial correlation that's done based on timestamp and inference based on that timestamp, but then the language model reads the log entries that are coming through. It can parse them and make a determination that, okay, this is probably your root cause of what's going on. Exactly. Following that, without having to predefine what all the fields are within the log, it can actually parse out all the significant fields. The AI can on its own, and move ahead from there. It's quite powerful, especially when we go back to the days of, oh, you want to be able to parse this log? Hope your regex is up to date, and then
exactly,
off you go.
Exactly.
So there's another set of challenges here when we're talking about AI. One being, you can have a moderate network with, dozens or hundreds of devices, and then really big networks where you've got, maybe thousands of server-facing ports and so on, which is maybe a different set of data to be interpreting. If I want to run AI, at scale, dealing with millions upon millions of events that might be coming in at any given time, is that a different problem set that I'm dealing with, or is it all kind of solved the same way?
It'll be a mix of both, right? You just even going back to the example that you used. One of the things AI or just, these machine learning tools are really good at is going through tons and tons of data and kind of finding the interesting bits. You look at your log files, look at alert messages, and you may say, do like a term frequency analysis and say, hey, this device, this node, this alert, whatever, keeps showing up, and use machine learning to go, find the interesting things in your network, and then use some of the Gen AI tools to then extract meaning from that and say, okay, this is something you should take, this is something you should take a look at and make some recommendations in terms of, maybe go, poke at this a little bit and find out why this device keeps generating alerts or that kind of thing. I'm not sure that's necessarily a device scale issue as much as a network complexity issue. And I think we've all seen networks that are moderate in size, but, you feel like thousands of pages of config on the routers, and others that are, there's hundreds or, hundreds of nodes, but okay, they're relatively straightforward.
That's actually a fair point in that, a lot of the data center environments I've worked in, those configurations tended to be simpler because that's how you scaled it. You kept it as simple as possible. And yet some of the WAN router configs you build out, they'd be these ridiculous, massive, almost inscrutable code just to get that thing configured because of all the tunneling and encryption and the different routing protocols that were there, and redistribution and access list control filtering and so on. They could be rather monstrous.
Yeah, and they never get shorter because everyone's scared to take a line of code out because they never know if it's.
Yeah. So when I'm dealing with some amount of scale, whether it's either just complexity driven scale or it's size, number of events that I'm processing, am I doing all of that AI ML processing on site myself on my own hardware, or am I farming this out to a third party? It's happening in the cloud, or it's happening with my vendor. Is that an either or is that a both?
I think it's both. Certainly, I mean, we look at service provider and enterprise customer base, right? So, and they have two very different views of shipping their information into the cloud, where enterprises are much more used to SaaS and cloud-based solutions these days. Service providers are, still have the fortress mentality, and they feel like they need to keep hold of the data and keep it, keep it under lock and key, because they're fat targets for attacks and those kinds of things.
Just to add to this, right? AI inherently needs a scale, right? That's the only way where AI can excel. If you don't have a scale of, data, and of course the scale of the data that comes from, the scale of the systems generating the data behind, right? How many devices and so on, and how frequently you're generating data. But if you don't have a scale, you cannot drive proper insights out of the AI algorithms. And scale and cloud go, hand by hand. So I think definitely cloud is going to play a fundamental role, but that doesn't mean that you cannot deploy certain types of solutions on-prem as well, depending on, of course, the, privacy requirements or even latency requirements and so on. But I think in general, AI and cloud are going to be, friends moving forward.
You're talking about the rent a GPU? Is that what you're getting at, basically?
Not necessarily. I mean, it could be depending on the type of solution, right? But I think, in general, AI requires a lot of storage. In general, requires a lot of compute, potentially GPUs, right? A large amount of memory, and that is inherently available in the cloud. It can also be available on-prem, of course.
So are you saying if I'm thinking about evaluating AI capabilities, if I'm already in a cloud-based environment with my infrastructure, it's more likely that someone's going to be able to provide an AI service on top of that because the data is already in the cloud versus me wanting to roll out something on-prem?
I think the entry barrier will be lower if all that is already on the cloud. I would say it's going to be easier.
If your data's in one place and your training cluster somewhere else, you need to kind of figure out how to bridge that gap.
I guess the other thing I'm thinking about is, are we talking about, organizations who just want to consume AI capabilities delivered to them by somebody else versus having to build out my own AI infrastructure to then do the training and get the benefit of building out my own AI?
I think that's a TBD, whether it's expensive to build a cluster out than maintain it, right? I
Yeah,
think this
for
is
sure.
this is a great place where SaaS makes more sense. It's like I just want analytics. I don't want to have to build the infrastructure
Mhm.
to go run that. I think there is some issues to be solved in terms of security and access we just talked about. But I think there also needs to be some more maturity in terms of the services and the vendors that are out there and exactly what kinds of things they're delivering. So it's expensive. Someone has to pay the cost, and then someone has to figure out how to stay in business long enough to build a customer base around that. And I don't think we're quite there yet. I think it also depends, back to the question, I think it also depends on the kinds of things you want to do. If, the insights and analytics piece is a much lower risk window to that because it's kind of read-only access, where at most the risk is you're exposing, all the IP addresses for your backbone routers or something like that, as opposed to kind of the write access to your network where you're letting the cranky, ChatGPT run amok and change router configs and those kinds of things. So, the entry point should probably be SaaS types of things because it's easier to turn up. It's faster time to value because someone else did the hard work.
Mhm.
You just get to buy the analytics functionality and start to get insights. And, I think it'll go from there.
Well, it lowers your risk too. If okay, so AI is the hottest thing right now. It's all the hype. Everybody's talking about it. You guys are on talking
Mhm.
about it along with everybody else in tech is talking about AI in some level or another.
Hmm.
If I'm a company going, oh gosh, I don't know, what I think about all this, and it's expensive to get into it. Well, yeah, so you'll consume some of it with SaaS and see what you can do with it. Lower your risk there. But that leads me to another question, which is this inevitable? Is AI truly going to be a part of network operations going forward? Or is this, we're all dipping our toe in the water. We're all kind of seeing if there's something here, if the juice is worth the squeeze, so to speak, because it's hot and trendy. Do we see this as, no, there are definitely going to be such significant advantages to network operations that AI will become an integral part of this thing that we're all going to be using for the long term?
I say yes, but I also think it's a Bill Gates quote. We'll overestimate what happens in 2 years and underestimate what happens in 10.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
so there's a lot of hype. There's a lot. I mean, there's not maturity in the market on any front, whether it's vendors and their expertise or customers and their operational ability to take the technology and do useful things with it. So I think there's a lot of flopping around, a lot of stumbling in the near term. But yeah, I think, I think it's much like the automation conversation. Like, is automation a thing? Do I need to learn Python? Well, yeah, you don't have to learn Python, but your job prospects will improve greatly if you can do, Python, Ansible, something like that. I think AI as a tool set or a skill set is going to do the same kind of thing. I think the other thing that makes it a hard question to answer is things are changing so quickly. I mean, Javier and I talk about this all the time. Something that seemed undoable 6 months ago, suddenly, oh yeah, it's, someone just posted something in Git that allows you to do that. It really reminds me of networking back when I had hair. And there was, it just the technology evolved so quickly, and the things you could do, changed like almost monthly. And this is kind of where AI is right now in that very, in that foundry phase where just the capabilities are just nuts how quickly they're evolving.
Well, it is nuts, and it's nuts in a broader context too, that of network automation. If we look at network automation broadly, and you got a bunch of people that are just trying to get their heads around that, like you made the comment about Python. Well, it's Python and a whole bunch of other tools, and it's not just tools; it's the frameworks around you would build an automation system for your organization. And it's people scratching their heads going, how do I make this go? Because it's happened so quickly,
Hmm.
also slowly, but it's happened very quickly,
Hmm.
by and large. And the evolution of how we do network automation continues to change and iterate that it's hard to keep up with, especially if you're, just very busy heads down trying to keep a network running. It's not like you've had all this time to sit around and figure out automation. And now AI comes on the scene, which adds another dimension to network automation. And it's like, what the heck am I supposed to focus on? It feels a little I don't know. It's a tense moment if you're a network engineer. It's like it used to be I knew spanning tree and routing protocols, and that was good enough. And now it's not. Now it's not close.
So I'm going to plug Javier's book here because I think for folks that are sitting there, it's a really good example of how do you take the tools and the mindset and apply it to the things you're probably working on today. And I think that's one of the things we try and drive. Your problem set doesn't change because of Gen AI and Gen AI types of things. You have the same things you need to do to run your network, your heads down. Here's a problem set that might make life easier. And I like the book because it's pragmatic stuff. If you're a network engineer, you're going to flip through the pages. Okay, I recognize this. This is something I was just wrestling with last week. And then you start to understand how you can start leveraging these tools and layer them into what you already do. And come at it that way. It's, the FOMO YOLO piece of, oh, there's something cool. I need to figure out how to use Gen AI and ChatGPT to do stuff. You're not going to, you'll be frustrated and your boss is going to be wondering why you're wasting your time and it's probably not going to get you so far. If you can, when I'm talking to execs, we should look at AI as a way to affect the KPIs you already care about and find tools that help you do a better job with sustainability or, root cause analysis or those kind of things. That's, kind of incrementally grow the things you can do is where you'll get traction, where it'll be useful.
Sort of to that point, Omar, I was at a recent PA network user group, a NUG event, and hearing different takes on AI. One person said at their organization, the executives sort of came in and said, here's some AI, use it. And they were like, well, for what? And they were like, I don't know, but it's AI, use it. And so it didn't really go anywhere. But then somebody else was like, well, I had a bunch of logs and I was looking for something and I tucked them into ChatGPT and said, hey, can you find this? And it did. So there it is, sort of like people kind of flopping around and trying to figure out use cases. But it does seem like you kind of we're in an experimental phase, and sort of top-down mandates to embrace AI may not necessarily be the way to go because the field isn't really hashed out yet.
Oh, I guarantee you it's not the way to go. I remember having way back when having a meeting with a large West Coast healthcare provider, and we were going through how do they apply cloud to their environment. And we looked at what they're doing, and it really it wasn't a good fit at the time, but their board had said, okay, you need to have a cloud strategy. And like, our cloud strategies we have, we don't want it right now.
Right. Sometimes the strategy can be say, no, yeah, we don't need that.
But, Ethan, we've sat here for longer than we should talk about. But we've gone through this with cloud, with virtualization, with SDN. They all kind of have the same kind of thing. I mean, one of my taglines is, turning unicorns into plow horses. And you got to cut through the hype and figure out, okay, if we go through all that stuff, how do I actually get this thing to do useful things for me? And this is the same kind of challenge or filter with AI. That piece doesn't, is not changing just because the bright shiny is different this week than it was last week.
One way I like to look at this, and back to your question, Ethan, on how strong is really the connection between AI and network operation. Is this going to be just an ephemeral hype, or is it going to, take, roots? To me, AI is just a natural evolution of what we do today with network automation. And the reason being that, what we have been doing in terms of network automation has been focused primarily, even though not exclusively, but primarily in automating actions, right? But on every network activity that we do across the network lifecycle, whether it's the planning or the building or the operation and so on, there are actions and then there are decisions. And if we want to scale automation as a whole, right, and we are very good at automating actions, the immediate next bottleneck that is going to, come are the decisions, and decisions depend on people. So we need to start addressing the decisions. How do we automate decisions? How do we expand from automating only actions or primarily actions into decisions? And automating decisions is about data, algorithms, and knowledge. And that's where AI plays a fundamental role, irrespective of, generative AI, LLMs, or irrespective of any technology in particular, right? This argument is not really dependent on, the fact that now LLMs are very trending, right, or very interesting. It's the fact that we need to scale automation and that's a business imperative. And the only way to address it, of course, we might still need to automate more and more actions, but we need to start tackling the decision part. And that's where AI plays a fundamental role.
I think that's a really great distinction because I think me personally, when I think about AI, I automatically move to let the machine take an action or make a decision for me. But what you're saying is maybe the way to come into AI is don't forget about that decision-making support, where in the earlier example you said, instead of getting, 10 alerts and I go through them one by one and try to piece them together myself, an AI tool could summarize them for me and provide some context that then helps me make that decision.
So, okay, that's a point of clarity then. You're saying AI as augmentation for human decision making, not AI using an algorithm and predictions to make decisions on its own, or are you saying that?
Well, I think, over time, we might see both, in the long term. I think for the foreseeable future, and there might be maybe some, of course, there's cultural aspects, there's process aspects, there's trust aspects. The main role for AI will be to help us make better decisions, make more decisions and faster decisions. But the responsibility of the decisions will still be on the human. I think that's going to be the case, maybe in the short and midterm, definitely.
Yeah,
I mean, I think
the near-term augmentation should be the goal for a number of reasons, both just looking at the maturity of the technology, but also maturity of the customer. Strive for that first, and then if we get good at that, then take the human out of the loop at some point. But in terms of picking out new goals, help people make better decisions or take better actions.
I think even in the automation space, taking AI out of it, a lot of the worry around automation is I'm going to automate a mistake and cause a problem. And now you want me to let a machine do it? People are worried about running a script, never mind letting an AI take care of it. So this rethinking of, well, let's look at AI as a decision support tool, as an analysis tool to help me make a decision and then take an action, maybe more comfortable for people and the better way to go, at least at the start.
Yeah, I mean, as we are planning our product, one of the trajectories we have to think about, which you don't have to think about with anything else, is building trust with a customer. And, you kind of, boiling the frog is probably not the best analogy, but, it's a boiling the frog thing where you have customers start to build trust in the tool. And for us, our the trigger is we can get to the point Javier talked about, okay, we can do all the analysis and say, oh, you should do this. And, and at some point, what the tool suggests is going to be so in sync with what the human would have said. Okay, yeah, that's what I would do too. We want to get to the point where we're not pushing the automation. The customer's like, okay, this is irritating. You know the right thing to do. Why do I have to press the button? Can you just press the button for me? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the threshold to be able to push through. And I don't think there are a lot of tools that will do that yet. I mean, we have something that we're looking at from a sustainability perspective, where we can do some of this projection on traffic and say, okay, we can turn off optics. Even we can turn them back on in a millisecond, but we can turn off optics to save energy when the link's not being used. And everyone says, yeah, that's a great feature, and we love that, and it'll help us hit our goals. But at the end of the this was a developer day session. At the end of the session, I asked, okay, who would actually turn this on? And out of 50 people, I got like 2 tentative hands. Say, okay, we might think about it, and that's kind of the challenge. So a lot of this is, it's a trust building exercise as much as a technological capability exercise.
It's a trust building exercise, but part of it, I think, is due to the fact that since we all build our networks the same but different in important ways, that it's hard to build AI that knows your network well enough, because there's a lot of assumptions you can't make. You don't exactly know how this network's going to be because it's not built to a predefined standard. And so to get trust in the model to the point where the decision that it's recommending, or in a perfect world, pressing the button for you, actually making the decision and doing it, means it's figured out your unique network to such a degree that you can actually do that. And it feels like a very hard problem to me. Maybe it's not so hard. I don't know if you get the training data right.
But I think that's the thing, right? When you talk about agents and these kind of things, it's, you have tools that cover the invariant piece of your network. Everyone uses the same BGP stack. Then you have the stuff that's codified in your head, where you understand, okay, this is what I should do or can't do. And that, that's where we do pull how effectively can you pull the data and parse those things out and distill them into a set of rules or an algorithm or a model that can then replicate your decision making in at a reasonable level of accuracy that you feel comfortable at least offering opinions up front, saying, "Hey, you should really try doing this." Then at some point, saying, "Okay, go do your thing. I've got better things to do."
Here's another question for you guys related to tooling. You mentioned something, I think it was you, Omar, that made the point about like Python as a skill set in automation. It's like, do you have to learn it? No, but if you do learn it, there's certain advantages that comes to you. But Python feels like a skill you can grab as a network engineer. It's a scripting language. It's well documented. It's something you kind of have your head around already. Even if you've only ever built a router config, you can kind of translate that and go, oh, scripting. Okay, I get this, even if you've never done it before. It doesn't feel out of reach.
Mm-hmm.
AI, like learning to work on it yourself, feels like this out of reach magical thing because the way it's presented. Oh, you've got to have, special hardware, and you've got to have a data that's formatted in a particular way that it can be ingested and it's tagged properly and so on. And then you've got to write an algorithm that knows what to do with it. And it feels way out of reach. Like you need a developer with very special skills to be able to deliver some kind of AI tooling. That I'm not going to grow that in my network operations shop. I got to hire that out. I got to hire a special developer. It feels different to me. So do you think that AI, from an adoption perspective, is going to be like what we've seen in network automation, where some companies have gone out to a vendor and purchased automation tooling? Some companies have rolled their own solutions with open source software and come up with their own thing. AI feels different to me. Is it not different?
So I think you need to not approach AI as the big thing. That's like saying approaching networking. Well, networking is not a thing. It's a bunch of little things, and find the piece you're gonna, that's useful to you. I think Drew's example is great of a good place to start, where, I've got a bunch of logs. I'm gonna hand it over to ChatGPT and let it run through that and try and find some meaning for me. I think that's a great place to start. It uses off-the-shelf tools. There's not a bunch of upfront investment. You're learning to use tools, and then next time he's going to be a little better and smarter about where it might be applicable and how to structure his prompts and stuff. So then Drew as an individual, I'm picking on Drew right now. Drew as an individual is going to be faster and more effective and maybe more accurate than the guy or the gal one cube over that's going through things by hand and trying to make sense of the same kind of data.
Although I may also be getting a visit from the compliance officer for some sensitive data that was in those logs that I just sent to ChatGPT, but that's a different conversation.
Also a fair concern.
Now, Omar, when you gave that example, you reminded me that Cisco's John Capobianco has done a bunch of work with a variety of tools. He didn't get deeply into AI programming, but he wrote Python that would summon various ChatGPT and other augmentation models, and he was able to feed it information from a router and some state information and stuff, and then query it and get back information. He's open sourced some of those tools. I think that feels more like what you're talking about too. You dig into the tool. You don't have to create a tool from scratch. But learn how to use tools that are out there that can pull data for you, give you some answers, give you insights that you didn't have before.
Yeah, I mean, there's commercial tools out there. There's open source stuff. There's libraries. I mean, much like automation, you get a full spread, and it's kind of picking out what you can afford, what you have access to, and again, what problem you're trying to solve.
I think it's important that we realize that, again, back to the argument that I was making earlier about whether AI, is going to play a fundamental role in the evolution of, network operation or networking. And if that is the case, let's suppose we agree on that, I think it's going to be fundamental as well in the evolution of the skills of a network engineer that we incorporate some level of awareness of those techniques. That doesn't mean that the network engineer becomes a data scientist or needs to start training models or anything like that. That could be that could be the case if that person is interested in that. But I think it's first important that we all speak the same language, that we all understand the terminology. If at all, just to be critic on what people are telling us that they pretend to do or what they are going to do with AI, because you must be able to differentiate what is real or what is just fantasy. So that by itself, I think it's necessary for network engineers to have that critical mind. And then, of course, there's also the possibility, and many of the network engineers are curious by nature, right? Develop that curiosity, experiment a bit, play, because that will give you also a point of view on whether some technique might help in your network to solve a certain problem. It doesn't mean that you will implement it. Maybe you will use a commercial tool. But I think it's extremely good to strengthen, even the professional evolution of network engineers to add this type of skills. Again, not to the point of necessarily becoming data scientists.
So where would I start if I wanted to start, just developing a general fundamental knowledge of AI so that at the very least, when someone comes in, to the conference room to tell me about their AI solution, I can get a sense of when they're trying to sell me a fantasy?
Well, I don't want to make like self-promotion of my book, but there's a lot of different
I teed you up for this, so go ahead, take it.
Yeah, I know. I did it I wrote the book for that reason, right? I went through that journey where I wanted to start. And of course, what happened to me, and I'm sure it's the same that happened to others, is I made a lot of mistakes. I bought a lot of books that were not useful for me at all, because everything looked relevant, right? Everything was related to machine learning. Everything was, on paper, yeah, I should probably know about that, but maybe I didn't need to know that, at least maybe at that stage. So for a network engineer, there was no clear, okay, this is the path you should follow from 0 to maybe 100. And that's the reason why I wrote the book. So I think that would be one way, but definitely, now I think it's important that, of course, there are many sources of information, probably too many, and we get a lot of noise, and it's difficult to filter what is really relevant, what is just, hype, or what is fundamental knowledge that you should build. I think my book might help on that.
And we've mentioned it a couple of times, but I don't think we've said the title, so I'll just do that here. It's called Machine Learning for Network and Cloud Engineers, and we'll have that link in the show notes.
I think some of it is also how deeply you want to get into it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that from getting into the math and the science of that, which for some people might be interesting. And I think at some point the foundational knowledge is useful. But otherwise, I think a lot of the non-traditional resources, I think John's a great example of someone who's looking at AI and its application to network automation, and we kind of get to do the journey with him in real time. Nick Russo, the work he had done, just recently, was saying, same kind of thing, this journey of discovery. I think those are the types of resources that, to search out. That's another great example. There's a lot of good conversations that are happening on that Slack server, and a good place to ask questions and see what other folks are doing, and get an actual benchmark about where other people are, and not necessarily the stuff that's driven by Twitter and headlines and PRs.
Omar just said NAF. That's Network Automation Forum, networkautomation.forum. There's a Slack group you can sign up. I'm in that Slack. I monitor what's going on, and lots of discussion about automation broadly, of course, but then AI comes up as well in the most recent AutoCon event, which at the time we're recording this was AutoCon 1 in Amsterdam. There was some AI talk from the stage about how to begin implementing AI and how it's going to impact network automation stuff. That was part of the discussions that were going on there. So it's definitely on the minds of folks. Okay, there was a topic that we missed along the way here, and Omar, I think you said something about AI agents, and I caught that and I filed it and then forgot to follow up on it. So I'm following up on it now because I want to make sure we hit that. I want to understand what that was.
Sure. I'm actually going to, hand it off to Javier, who's been who's been the torchbearer for agents within the organization. So I think Javier can give us a tour of agents and why you care.
Yeah, the concept of AI agents or autonomous agents, it's something that is generating a lot of interest, not just in our industry, but across the board. And it's probably, I think, the next big thing after the LLMs themselves, right? In order to understand what an agent is, let's start by what an LLM is, right? An LLM is basically a mathematical function. You push some input, you get an output. That's how it behaves. There's no other activity. There's no other, even proactivity from the LLM itself. It's just a very passive mathematical function, very good at what it does. Now, if you want to solve complex problems that might require some level of reasoning and some maybe multiple steps to solve that problem and so on, you cannot do it with an LLM by itself. So now there's been, this new interesting, let's say, concept or architecture that is called autonomous agent. And an autonomous agent is an entity that uses an LLM as if it was its little brain, right? With this type of architecture and with the ability to self-plan based on your request and autonomously execute the plan that it has automatically generated, these systems can actually, resolve or address quite complex tasks autonomously. So when you think about this and when you think about this concept applied to networking, this has the potential to help us delegate more complex tasks to autonomous systems that can then figure out by themselves how to go about your request, whether it's a request of data from the network or whether it's a request for something you need the agent to do on your behalf on the network, maybe even troubleshooting a network problem. So these systems have the ability to figure out autonomously what's the plan to solve this. And when you take this further, right, there are now multi-agent architectures where there are multiple agents collaborating together, maybe as a swarm, or maybe with specialized agents on different tasks, and they can, collectively work towards a specific goal, towards a specific intent. So I think there's a lot of potential in our, networking industry to use this idea of an autonomous agent as a sort of next generation, network automation driven by systems that can autonomously plan, right, their execution. So it has a lot of potential. We're still early in that, maybe in the evolution of the technology, but it's definitely something we are exploring because I think it might help us in that journey towards, what more and more people are talking about, the autonomous network, right?
So if I'm getting the distinction here, I would, rather than like me asking an LLM today and then getting back a set of instructions and then I come up with whatever it is that I need to do, some series of steps, I ask the agent who can interface with LLM and then figure out all of those things for me. And then that I can put that plan into place, but I don't have to do the specific. I don't have to implement what the LLM is telling me because the agent will do that for me.
Exactly.
Okay, it's a little bit of inception there. And it's not quite decision making either, like we were talking about earlier. It's it is a form of automation. I think that right, the way you described it is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I mean it's been able to automate more complex problems that require some level of reasoning, some level of breaking down the complex task in smaller steps. And of course, you can put check-ins and validations from a human perspective at any point in the process, right? But somehow the system becomes a little bit more autonomous in making progress towards the end goal.
I'm going back to Omar's early example about, there are things that algorithms can do that aren't AI. How would you contrast agents to an algorithm that's just supposed to trigger an event based on some parameters that happen?
Well, they would complement each other, right? You would still, none of this, even generative AI, is not going to replace the more specialized algorithms that you might have for anomaly detection or for, prediction and so on. But those, when they detect some situation, they might signal towards an agent, hey, this is happening, right? I need a plan about how to solve this or how to go about this situation. And then the agent might take that input, maybe along with some other context that it can collect from the network, and come up with a plan to identify what is going on, what is the root cause, and then maybe present this information to the human much more curated and organized so that the human can make a final decision. I think they will complement each other, definitely.
So Javier, earlier you mentioned, we were talking about, how do we get into AI, and you mentioned play. Do you have any suggestions for sort of safe or easy ways folks can start just playing with AI and experimenting and just trying little things, in a safer and easy manner?
Well, there are definitely a lot of technical resources and something that, network engineers are not usually very familiar with, but I think it's something that, it would be good to start exploring more and more, even in the context of network automation, but definitely in the context of, learning to do some level of machine learning and analytics with your network data. There is this concept of notebooks, whether it's notebooks that you deploy or platforms that you deploy on-prem, like Jupyter Notebooks, or maybe cloud-based offering for notebooks like Google Colab, for example. These are free of charge resources where you can even get GPUs to play, to experiment, and if you go and do some trainings or maybe read some books around this, you can actually practice there. You can get more familiar. You can maybe upload your own, network data to experiment. So I think definitely I would suggest all network engineers to become familiar with the concept of a notebook and how to use it to experiment with machine learning.
Yeah, I mean, shout out to Google. They have some great online trainings that's free for coming up to speed on AI basics, what LLMs are, how they work, those kinds of things. So for folks that just want to get a better handle on just the foundational stuff, it's a great resource that's free. You can get certifications and stuff like that if just to help buff out your resume.
Okay, well, guys, good conversation on AI. You framed up some things a little differently than I was thinking about it before. One thing you clarified for me for sure was the ability to actually dig into these tools and use them without having to be an AI coding expert and know deep math and matrix math and so on, and all those things that are, as you read up on machine learning and AI, that just are just part of the conversation. It's nice to know those things. You don't have to know those things to be able to leverage these tools in a meaningful way. And of course, we're in a big time of change here. So if you want to get your heads around all of this stuff, those of you that are listening, Machine Learning for Network and Cloud Engineers is Javier Antich's book, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes. We mentioned John Capobianco. If you don't know John, he's a mad scientist. He's always doing lots of insane things with Python and automation, and he's dug into AI, and he's demoed for me and for lots of folks a number of interesting tools he's using where the last thing he demoed was he had ingested a bunch of router config and state information into an LLM and then was able to basically ask the router questions and get answers back from it based on what the LLM learned. And it was quite interesting, a very different approach to finding out information about network state and so on. And he's open sourced a bunch of tools. We'll get you some links for that too, as well as the notebooks that were mentioned right here at the end of the show. Javier and Omar, thank you very much for being with us today. Omar, if people want to ask you thoughtful questions online, what's the best platform for you these days? Is that LinkedIn or?
LinkedIn is probably the sanest platform I'm on these days. So
okay,
Omar Sultan's my handle, so you can just find me there.
Omar Sultan on LinkedIn. And what about you, Javier?
Yeah, same. LinkedIn is probably the best place at the moment.
Okay, very good. Thanks, guys. Much appreciated again. And thanks to you out there listening to Heavy Networking today and to Cisco for sponsoring the show. Packet Pushers is a full-time endeavor for several people. We can't do the work we do without our sponsors. And if you have questions about this show, you could send them to packetpushers.net/follow-up. And of course, you can find Omar and Javier on LinkedIn if you want to engage with them directly. In this episode, we did talk about automation somewhat, right? Well, if network automation is your jam, you should subscribe to the Network Automation Nerds podcast on the Packet Pushers Podcast Network. That's with host Eric Chu. You can also look into the Network Automation Forum that we mentioned with their AutoCon live events. That's all networkautomation.forum. I have been Ethan Banks with Drew Conray Murray. You can connect with us on LinkedIn or the Packet Pushers Slack group, which you can find for free at packetpushers.net/community. And last but not least, remember that too much networking would never be enough.